Hello, my name is Tony Gorton. I'm going to be presenting my creating project on using screencasts and Twitter to present final projects in German 2. My rationale for both of these projects is very similar. I've really been wanting to incorporate screencasting as well as Twitter into my German curriculum for a long time now. And doing the creating and the searching project really gave me the reason and motivation to do so. The end of German 2 is an important landmark for many of my students because many of my students only take 2 years of a foreign language to meet the graduation requirement. So at the end of German 2, it marks the end of their German career. In my class, the end of German 2 ends with them turning in their portfolio. And then the final unit is a unit where they create a gnome, they adopt it, we have an adoption ceremony all in German, they create a book all about their gnome with pictures that they present to the class, and this year they will be also creating a Twitter for their gnome. Lesson 1, ePortfolios made in Google presented in a screencast. So just a brief description of this lesson. So at the end of the final unit, students will put the finishing touches on their portfolio, and students will submit their completed portfolio in the form of a screencast. Students are going to walk me through their portfolio, starting with the goal that they set out for themselves, highlight their best work, show me what they're most proud of, reflect on the learning process, and lastly, tell me what proficiency level they reached. I'll quickly show you their ePortfolio. So what they're going to need to do this project is the Google Doc that I shared with them the first week of school and they added to their drive. The first week of school, students reflected on not only their strengths and weaknesses in German, but what is their learning goal for the year and how are they going to achieve it. Each unit starts with a pre-test and ends with a post-test, and they record their scores for those here. And then for the categories reading, listening, writing, and speaking, they need to upload their best work. And then at the end, they need to reflect on how many of the actful I can statements can they do that I set out for them. At the end of semester 1, they reflected on their grade, told me what they were most proud of, as well as their proficiency levels in reading, listening, writing, and speaking. And they do the same thing at the end of semester 2. To complete this project, they're also going to need the internet, a computer, a microphone. I'm going to have my students do this on Screencast-O-Matic because it's the website I am most familiar with. I've created a guide for them that I will give them. This walks them through and helps them create their speaking points so that when they record their screencast, they already have prepared exactly what they're going to say. And then it will also just keep them focused and make sure that they hit all of the points that I want them to discuss in their screencast. And then lastly, they will have a copy of the rubric that I've created for this project. I use a 5-point scale. So a 5 is the best score they can get, a 1 is the lowest. What skills and knowledge do teachers have to have going into this project? So teachers are going to need to be familiar with basic computer functioning, as well as be familiar with screencasting. I suggest that teachers spend some class time explaining to students what screencasts are and why they're being required to make one for this project. So I'll tell my students exactly my reasoning behind having them do a screencast for this. And then I'm also going to show them an example screencast that I've created so they can see that I'm not asking them to do something that I myself haven't done. And then I also just believe it's best practice to always give students a rubric so they know exactly how they will be assessed. What prior skills do students need to have? So students are going to need to have basic knowledge of computers. For example, how to turn up the microphone, how to check the volume to make sure that their screencast volume is at a good level. What are the procedures of this project? So step 1 of the project is to explain. So explain what a screencast is and why students are required to make one. Show students an example, show them Screencast-O-Matic, and then explain to them how their screencast will be graded. Step 2 is to prepare. So I'm going to give my students in-class time to develop their presentation. I will hand out that guide I showed earlier to help them create their script, and then I'm going to have my students create a practice screencast just so they can get comfortable with it that they'll just delete. Step 3 is to record. So the first step is to go to screencast-o-matic.com, make sure the microphone and volume is turned up, test the audio. Then they're going to need to set their window to the appropriate size so they're recording only what they want to be recorded. If students are using a Mac or a laptop, I'm going to suggest that they turn off the loud mouse clicks and switch it over just to a tap to click option because the clicks will be picked up on the screencast. When students are ready to record, they're going to need to find a quiet space because all background noises will be picked up on the screencast. And then I'm just going to suggest to students that if they do make a mistake, they pause for 4 seconds so at the end of it, they can just easily edit out those mistakes. And then step 7, record. And number 8, if they have any mistakes or they don't like it, they can it, get rid of it, delete it, and re-record as many times as necessary. The final step is just to upload it. Of course, it's always good to review your screencast before uploading it. Students are going to have to make sure they're saving it as a movie file, and then they're going to share their file with me. They're going to share it on Schoology, which is the LMS I use. The advantages of this project, I'm going to start with one of my favorite quotes by Mark Van Doren. The art of teaching is the art of assisting discovery. I feel the main advantage of this project is that when we require students to reflect on the learning process, we're really engaging them and transforming them into self-regulating learners, which is my goal, which is why I'm requiring portfolios. I just think it's really important for students to reflect on the entire process because it takes learning to a deeper level, and I'm hoping that this screencasting project will bring the whole portfolio experience full circle. Disadvantages to this project: students are most likely going to be unfamiliar with the screencasting process, so you're going to have to walk them through screencasting, show them some examples, and then the classroom is probably not going to be the best location to record the screencast, so students are going to have to find a quiet space, which might be challenging, and do this at home. The instructional strategies included in this project are reflected discussion, so requiring students to reflect on the work that they've created throughout the school year and evaluate their learning process. Students are going to have to discuss if they were able to achieve their goal that they set out for themselves and how, as well as if they did not achieve their goal, explain why they were unable to achieve their goal. So I'm really hoping that with the e-portfolios and the screencasting project, students are actively engaged in taking ownership of their learning. Lastly, what ways can other teachers incorporate this project in their classroom? Well, first of all, any teacher that requires a portfolio or an e-portfolio, they can use this lesson and have students reflect over the entire portfolio via screencast. Or any teacher wanting students to do a presentation, but they don't have time in class to do it, they can have them create a screencast and then view the video files at a later time. Lesson 2, give a gnome a home Twitter. So for this lesson or project, during the give a gnome a home unit, students are going to be required to create a Twitter profile for their gnome, all in German, and I will set guidelines and give them specific things that they need to tweet about. The technology and resources involved: students are going to need the internet. If they have a smartphone, they can access Twitter on the Twitter app, or they can use a computer, a school computer, and use the Twitter website. I'm going to be sending home a parent letter at the beginning of this to inform parents why we're using Twitter in the classroom, what the rules are, and just to invite parents to follow their students' gnome, to engage them and involve them in this project as well. What skills do teachers need to have to do this project? Teachers are going to need to know how to sign up and create a Twitter. I am going to create a Twitter for my gnome, and I will show that to students. I think it's really important that students see exactly what your expectations are. Students will see my gnome's profile and have a good idea of what their profile for their gnome should look like as well. And then once again, they're going to have a rubric so they know exactly how they're going to be assessed for the assignment. What prior skills and knowledge do students need to have to do this project? So students are going to need to have basic computer skills. Chances are most students are going to already be experts with Twitter and have the app downloaded on their phone. But for students that are unfamiliar, teachers can pair them up with students that are really good with using Twitter and have them kind of work with them and walk them through the process. What are students asked to do? They're going to have to create their Twitter. I'm going to require my students to make a total of 14 posts. 9 of these tweets will be based on this year's units. So they're using that target vocabulary. And then 5 of the posts will be photo tweets with captions. And they will be assessed using this rubric. Once again, on a 5-point scale, a 5 being the highest grade they can earn, a 1 being the lowest, and then I've also correlated these scores with the proficiency levels. I have different categories here, 4 different categories, and then I will average their score to be out of 5. All right, the step-by-step procedures of this project. So step number 1 is to go over the rules and expectations. Since this is requiring students to use social media, it's very important that the teacher go over internet and social media safety with students, go over digital citizenship with students, remind students of your school's internet policies, clearly state to students your personal rules for using Twitter in your classroom, model how you want students to use Twitter for their gnomes, and then of course tell students what the consequences are if there is inappropriate Twitter usage. Step 2, communicating with parents. I'm going to do this by sending home the parent letter. Step 3 is setting up accounts. Most students, like I said, are probably going to already have Twitter accounts, so it'll be easy for them to create a second one for their gnome. But if they are unfamiliar, here are the 7 steps provided by Twitter. And then I'm also going to require my students to follow other students' gnomes just to make this a collaborative experience. And then the final step is to get started. Students will have to add a picture of their gnome and then create their gnome's first tweet in German. What are the advantages to this project? I feel there are many advantages to this project. One, I feel incorporating social media takes the gnome project to a whole new level. They're going to be able to interact with other students' gnomes, and my hope is to have other teachers in the district that do this project as well. We can interact with gnomes from other high schools. This project gets students using the target language in a real life setting. Students use Twitter all the time in English, so now they're going to be using Twitter in German, but in a safe and controlled environment. It's going to create a sense of digital community because students' gnomes can interact with other gnomes. They can see what their other classmates' gnomes are doing, etc. Yeah. And then for me, this is a great way for my students to log their gnomes activities. Disadvantages: Twitter is not something that students often use for educational purposes, so you're going to really have to go over how you want Twitter to be used in your classroom and what your expectations and consequences are. Effective instructional strategies included, so this requires students to use the target language in a real life setting, which is always the goal of world language teachers. Students are going to have to formulate their own sentences without going over the 140 character limit. It fosters collaborative learning because students will be engaging and commenting on other gnomes posts. And then lastly, how can other teachers use this? There are lots of other ways listed here that students or other teachers can adapt this project into their own classroom. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation.